So, good morning, everybody. I think we start. I've heard Bonn is also ready to start. Good morning, everybody, to our session on loss and damage and adaptive social protection. This session is a kind of an experiment. We have audiences here in Berlin, in Bonn, and online. To let you know, in Bonn and online, here there are, I would say, approximately 50 people. I don't know, how does it look like in Bonn? You are there, how many are you?
I think we're like 20 people.
Okay, and online, Stefan?
Roughly 10, but quickly increasing, so okay. Exponential growth.
Yeah, to start off, perhaps I explain how it came about the session. Actually, it started when I was changing units like 2 months ago from the climate policy unit to the social protection unit, and I quickly understood it would have been so good if I would have known more about social protection and adaptive social protection in my last job in the climate unit. And on the same time, I understood that my new colleagues. There's a big discussion at global social protection funds and financing arrangements, but they are not really alert that there is this extremely important discussion about L&D financing, where people are talking not millions, but billions of financing, which part of it should go, I guess, through social protection systems. So we said, okay, we have to use now this conference and increase the knowledge on it. And the first idea was, okay, the Bonn conference, the SPs are going on. We invite some experts over. Actually, who in the room knows what SPs mean? Just two. How many in the room in Bonn knows what SPs means?
Yeah, I think it's like
everybody. Can one person explain for the Berlin audience in one sentence what are the SPs? What you're doing?
We need a volunteer from the audience. Simone.
Yeah, I mean, the Bonn climate talks are happening every year in Bonn to prepare the climate summit at the end of the year. The abbreviation stands for subsidiary bodies, extraphy, and it's not only about the technical negotiation process, it's also really a lot of experts in town, many side events, workshops, etc.
Yeah, thank you very much. So when we were starting to look for experts to come over, that, oh, no, we can't come, the SBs are going on, it's so important, but we can be there online. And then we said, let's grab this occasion, we are doing it both in Bonn and in Berlin, and of course have a virtual audience, and bring the social protection community with the climate negotiators and the routing climate communities together. And this is now the setting today. We have these audiences in Bonn and in Berlin, and of course online. We'll have climate people, mostly the experts sitting in Bonn, and we have the social protection experts here in the room. And to kick off, I want to ask two questions where I would ask you for kind of a self-assessment, how much you know about the process, where when you're raising a hand without a finger means I know nothing, and you can go up to 5 fingers, which means I know a whole lot of it. So the first question for Bonn and Berlin and online, please put the figure in the chat, is to what extent do you regard yourself as or do you have a high knowledge on adaptive social protection? So raise your hands here.
Maybe.
So I think the average here, maybe the number comes up to 3.5, yeah, to 4. What is it in Bonn?
Yeah, unfortunately, the average is between like 1 and 2 max.
Sorry, 2.
Yeah,
Average around 2.
There are some experts, but majority is new to the topic.
Okay. And then the other question is, to what extent do you know how the negotiations and loss and damages under the UNFCCC negotiations are going on? what is here your knowledge? Yeah, here it ranges between 1 and 4, but the average I think is more 1, I think. How is it in Bonn?
So in Bonn we have a lot of people showing 5. I would say average is like 4.
Okay, so we do this assessment at the end, and let's see whether we will have at the end an increase in knowledge on both sides. Yeah, the run-up of our session will be that we are looking at the questions always from 2 sides, more from the adaptive social protection side, and then always coming in from the loss and damage side. We will do this with presentations, one to introduce you, especially I think here the people in Berlin, how this L&D, this loss and damage, L&D is the abbreviation, the L&D discussions are going on, and perhaps so you can understand a little bit where and how adaptive social protection, ASP, can feature in. And then we have a second presentation explaining what ASP is and how can it contribute to respond to losses and damages. After this, we will have a panel discussion, also with 2 rounds, one looking more at what ASP can contribute, and the second round, how again ASP will feature in the L&D negotiation, and this will be followed by interactive Q&A session. So let me start with introducing the first speaker. We are starting off with Bonn, and Sönke Kraft will do a presentation on the negotiation process to set up the L&D financing arrangement and how the process under the UNFCCC framework will go on. Sönke Kraft leads the work of the Munich Climate Insurance Initiative, which is hosted by the United Nations University in Bonn. He is a long-standing expert in climate negotiations. Before joining MCII, the Munich Climate Insurance Initiative, he was the head of the climate policy team of the NGO German Watch. So, Sönke, please kick off.
Okay, yeah, thank you to Berlin. Also, my chance to have a really warm welcome all of you. We are really pleased to host the session in Bonn. I'm Sönke Kraft. I was already introduced. I've throughout the years always had like some interaction with the loss and damage discourse, the work program. I will also explain a few things. And I'm also a member of the technical expert group on comprehensive risk management, which is one of the technical expert groups under the WAS international mechanism. My role today, as Reinhard already introduced, is to get a little bit of basic understanding on where the discussions are coming from, and maybe also a few thoughts around how adaptive social protection as an emerging community of practice can contribute to the space. Okay, quickly, of course, people are always asking, what is loss and damage? This is the first question you are getting, and also often expecting that definition. There's no definition coming out of the UNFCCC process, but I think there's an emerging understanding and kind of space on where people are focusing on. Generally, if you look at the literature, for example, one differentiation that is done is that we're talking about losses and damages, and we're talking about loss and damage with capital letters. Losses and damages more in the science community, and if you, for example, look at the most recent synthesis report of the IPCC, you will find also very pointed recommendations and around losses and damages. For example, that losses and damages are happening with high confidence, and that the people and communities that have the least contributed to climate change are disproportionately affected. So very kind of high level and stark remarks coming out of the IPCC report. We are talking about loss and damage in capital letters. This is usually about the political process, but also policy and plans at the national level, and the process under negotiation within the United Nations, within the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. We were talking about what is loss and damages or losses and damages covering? We're talking about sudden onset events. So these are any climate related, for example, weather related events turning into disasters. Or we are also talking about slow onset processes. For example, sea level rise, desertification. This, of course, is a spectrum because some take place at indicator scale, others can also take place at between months. We're also talking about different types of loss and damage. We're talking about economic loss and damage, non-economic loss and damage. This has also been highlighted, for example, some of the decisions in the UNFCCC, and you can see for yourself this infographic on what this entails. So economic losses, non-economic losses, slow onset events, and slow onset processes and extreme events. So short history on where this conversation is coming from. So it's not, the term itself is not in part of the UNFCCC, the Framework Convention language. It was first coined as part of the Bali Roadmap, leading to the Copenhagen Climate Summit in 2009. And then this was, or this took like 1 year to be translated as COP decisions at the Cancun Climate Summit. And there, for the first time, there was actually some activities happening. The work program on loss and damage was established, and this took like 2 years. And after 2 years, there was a decision in the UNFCCC putting kind of the foundations out. Yeah, this is a topic. This is a topic of international cooperation, and the UNFCCC is going to deal with that. In 2013, for the first time, an institution was created, the so-called Warsaw International Mechanism, and its executive committees. And this was also then referenced in its own article within the Paris Agreement. The Warsaw International Mechanism is also an entity of the Paris Agreement, and there's a specific article talking about averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage. There were also some kind of operational decisions already back then, looking at, for example, risk transfer, creating a clearinghouse, but also working on the issue of displacement. I go for the years. In 2019, you find Santiago Network. That was a conference that actually then had to happen in Madrid, in Spain. A network for technical assistance was created, the so-called Santiago Network. And in 2021, so about 2 years ago, there was also a question on what will be the specifics of this technical assistance network, but also a general understanding that within the rules of the UNFCCC, the rules are creating understanding, helping with the coordination of actors on loss and damage, but also mobilizing support. That more needs to be done on the mobilizing support part. So there was already a conversation around mobilizing support for loss and damage, and the so-called Glasgow dialogue was established as a last minute. And it was also a process that actually happened last week in Bonn. Then last year at the COP, then really this issue of mobilizing finance for loss and damage took center stage at the climate talks. And the final decision was to create a financing arrangement and a fund at the next COP in at the end of the year in Emirates. This really is the year of loss and damage finance in a way. There are many questions still outstanding. I will come to that, and I will also put some of the questions on how can, for example, safety protection or specifically adaptive social protection come into the conversation. At the lower part of the graph, you see the kind of emerging institutional landscape that exists on loss and damage within the UNFCCC. Yeah, just quickly, what is this year about? What are some of the open questions? And this just in a very condensed say that at the end of the last COP, parties decided that there will be this funding arrangement. And the purpose is to assist developing countries that are particularly vulnerable. So the one question is like, who's going to benefit in terms of countries, but also in terms of communities. Focus will be on addressing loss and damage out of this minimizing and responding. And there's also a question on how to mobilize specifically new and additional resources. Question on how it works in the UNFCCC, but also to processes outside of the UNFCCC. Specifically, and that's really one of the important issues, that there's a new fund or a fund established, which focus among others on responding to loss and damage. And in order to create the details on how this fund exists, but also the broader funding arrangements, there's a transitional committee created, meeting this year, I think 4 times. We have some members here and they will also talk about it. Already 2 meetings happened prior to the Bonn SPs, another 2 are scheduled, and they are going to draft recommendations then for the COP to adopt data. Many questions, however, are still not yet answered. For example, questions around the scope, the eligibility, so who's benefiting from it, question around sources, how will this be sourced, how does it work with the existing funding arrangement, also what kind of coordination and alignment mechanisms will be created, and many more questions are still open. So we'll, I think, also touch on some of them during the discussions. Last point, maybe also then transitioning over to the next intervention or next presentation, is that I think it's fair to say that connecting the social protection community and the climate change community is long overdue, but it's also a little bit of a blind spot. And we have also worked on the concept then risk is different in the different communities. And there are some like emerging areas where social protection in general and climate change policy are working together. So for example, in terms of the objective to reduce the overall climate vulnerability, that's quite clear, but also then responding to specific impacts and disasters. Shock responsive social protection system as one of the words. Then also a question on moderating the negative impacts of climate change actions. So if there are any kind of distributional effects as a result of the introduction of climate, for example, climate protection policies. It's a question on how to involve social protection systems. And then also the general question on how social protection can help to create change behaviors and practices, and is part of the greater transformation. So that is some of the kind of pathways. We took this from a big overview paper that was published this year by Costella et al. And I think this is already some of the kind of areas where the communities really can work together. Loss and damage, maybe focusing mostly on the second one, responding to specific climate change impacts. And we learned also that specifically adaptive social protection can be a bridge, can also bring some of the silos together that exist, and maybe this can also be part of the conversation. With that, I hand over back to Berlin, right?
Thank you very much, Sönke. I found this was a very good presentation leading into the process, how loss and damages are discussed, and also to the substance of the discussion. I look at the room. Can you show me with your thumb? Has this increased your knowledge about the L&D discussions or not? Sönke? Yeah, the thumbs are really up. So you did a good job. Thank you very much. Now I hand over to Christian. Christian Bodewig is the practice manager for social protection and jobs for West and Central Africa. He was before leading the SASPP, the Social Adaptation, no, the Sahel Adaptive Social Protection Program of the World Bank. It was mentioned in nearly every session as one of the flagship programs for ASP, and he will explain us more what ASP is and how can it contribute to respond to losses and damages. Thank you very much.
on? Okay, super. So thanks a lot, Reinhard, and also thanks for Sönke for the introduction. And I think I'm going to pick up very much on where you ended on your last slide. And I have to see whether this goes forward. No, this is. There we go. So my job is, first of all, to see more fingers in Bonn when we ask after the session as to whether people know about adaptive social protection. We can see what is an appropriate target, moving up from a finger and a half. Maybe we can get closer to 3 fingers. So that's, but also to explain a little bit in the context of loss and damage. And I put up there essentially the pitch for the linkage between adaptive social protection and loss and damage. So from the perspective of development professionals like myself, we're concerned about the fact that a growing vulnerability to slow and fast onset climate shocks undermine any progress on poverty reduction and undermine the formation of human capital. And I'm mentioning poverty reduction and human capital because these are obviously priorities for the World Bank. And so this is really the cause of concern. The solution to this is to build adaptive capabilities at the household level and to help households to build sustainable and resilient livelihoods. It's clear that given the increased risk and vulnerabilities to climate shocks, that a humanitarian response that mobilizes each time there's a shock is perhaps not the institutional or long sustainable solution. Hence, the importance for governments to internalize crisis resilience in addition to the humanitarian response and to create national government-led adaptive social protection systems. And so from the perspective of loss and damage, it's really to encourage the building and then the use of adaptive social protection systems to deliver loss and damage support. And because these systems are household focused, are really the only viable tool to provide support at the household level at scale. So to talk a little bit about adaptive social protection at a glance. So first of all, these are programs that are focused on households, on poor and vulnerable households, typically the extreme poor, but can be also targeted to households that are less poor but are in particularly vulnerable areas of the country. They focus on the objective of resilience to shocks, building productive livelihoods, but also there's some emphasis on the next generation, again with the link to human capital that I mentioned earlier. Typically these are programs that have a cash transfer program at the core. Regular cash transfers that are targeted to extreme poor households, effectively to help them lift out of the stress of extreme poverty. Then they're typically accompanied by productive elements, training, savings groups, etc., simply to help households use the resources that they have to launch and diversify livelihoods and activities that make them give them a viable exit out of poverty and build resilience. There typically also emphasis on human capital through focus on early childhood, messaging to parents, encouragement to attend schools, to seek health services, etc. In some sense, a platform, because it's an entry point to poor households, a platform for a number of objectives that are geared towards resilience of the household. And that's perhaps the innovation over the last decade, is to leverage these systems for response to shock. And I'll talk about this in a second. What's important is that underneath these programs, they are what we call delivery systems. These are identification systems to be able to identify households and individuals, social registries of households with information that allows programs to be targeted, payment systems to ensure quick disbursement of cash support to households, and then, because of the link to climate events, early warning systems with triggers for cash shock response support. In a way, one can think of adaptive social protection of having a dimension of preparing for shocks through programs that build resilience at the household level, coping with shocks through fast shock response, and then adapt by helping households to diversify livelihoods. If you're in an environment of frequent shocks, you're a little bit in a situation of after the shock is before the shock, and so you see some similarities in terms of what does it take to prepare for shocks and to adapt to shocks, being around resilience programs of households to be able to diversify their activities. I'm zooming in a little bit in that middle part of coping, which is where a lot of the innovation of adaptive social protection has been, to intervene early in the situation when shocks arise. And so the logic of adaptive social protection is to see expansions. Either expansions of a vertical nature, meaning increasing benefit amounts to existing beneficiaries, because when a shock hits, existing beneficiaries may need more support to be able to weather the shock. Or horizontal expansions to bring in new beneficiaries that are not beneficiaries of regular programs, but are hit by shocks. And in order to expand horizontally, you need social registries with information of households and people that are vulnerable. So Reinhard may be a beneficiary of social protection, and so he's already in the program, but Christian is not. So it's important that the social registry has information about Christian so that Christian can be receiving support in the event of a shock. Over the last 10 years or more, a lot of innovation has been brought about adaptive social protection, a lot of evidence generation, and we have a strong body of positive impacts that adaptive social protection has. And one can organize them a little bit around different dimensions. So first of all, impacts at the household level. We know that these programs increase consumption, so households eat more, eat better, including in regular times to build resilience, but also when shocks occur. They use resources to invest in assets for new activities, for livelihood activities. So positive effects at the household level, including reduction of poverty, and increasing the evidence that this is sustained over a long period of time. There are effects on the overall economy in terms of multiplying effects of a dollar of cash carrying a return of between $1.20, $2.40. So there are different estimates in different settings. But the resources go in, they have a multiplier effect. There is evidence on social cohesion, how programs build confidence of marginalized communities, reduce the poverty depth, moving people up, dealing with tensions at the community level. And then, again, from the perspective of the next generation, there are positive effects on human capital in terms of activities that households seek, health-seeking behaviors, school attendance, parenting practices, etc. So a rich body of evidence with the basic message: these programs work. I'm going to say a few things about the Sahel Adaptive Social Protection Program, which is a program that has existed since 2014, is a partnership, the United Kingdom, Germany, Denmark, and France, together with the World Bank, and is focused on the 5 Sahel countries plus Senegal, and with the objective of supporting countries in creating, setting up, and developing and making stronger their adaptive social protection system. And so as a program that has both an emphasis of building the system and then using it. And I'm not going to go into the details, but I just want to say that through the program, we have seen significant building of capacity and system strength to be able to respond to shocks at scale, be it the annual food insecurity shock linked to the lean season, or as the recent COVID shock. So we've seen significant expansions, horizontal expansions, as well as vertical expansions, as I mentioned. The Sahel ASP program is a program that focuses both on technical assistance to help build systems, but also supports programs at scale, because it's an engine. You create an engine, and you need to let this engine run, right? So that's the logic of the Sahel ASP program. Now, to round off, what does it take to leverage adaptive social protection for loss and damage? So first of all, we're at a point where it's important to invest in these systems, to build, in some sense, to ready countries for loss and damage by developing adaptive social protection systems as the vehicle to provide loss and damage support to households. Right? It starts with establishing clear institutional arrangements. Who is in charge? Which ministry is in charge? With a clear vision, with functioning institutional mechanisms. And mechanisms that avoid siloism. Because if you look, for example, as an anecdote, if you look at nationally defined contributions, typically in many countries they don't refer to adaptive social protection, even where adaptive social protection exists in the country. So an integrating and clear institutional and policy setup. You need dynamic and wide-ranging social registries. That's in a way the core element, because if you don't have, and we've seen this as experience from the COVID pandemic, countries that had large social registries, such as Senegal, and we heard it this morning in the plenary session, were able to expand to provide significant support to the economic crisis to poor households. Whereas other countries who didn't have large social registries were a lot slower or weren't able to respond at the scale that was necessary. So building social registries, absolutely critical. But then you need to have programs that operate at some scale, like I mentioned, to let the machine run. And then lastly, you need to build financing mechanisms that can both absorb financing that comes in, but also that has a clear allocation of financing, where there's some national budget resources that can deal perhaps with the more frequent events, less intense, more frequent events, and then other more pre-positioned financing that can come in when you have more infrequent but more intense events. And so the whole discussion around disaster risk financing, including with the Global Shield, has to be seen in that context, where adaptive social protection can be an outlet for disaster risk financing resources that are available. And then it's about using these ASP systems, and that's really what I want to end on. We have countries that have advanced quite a bit in terms of building these systems and are ready to use these systems. There are other countries that have still a longer way, and where I think the common objective is to help countries build the systems. But eventually, these systems are there and are, like I said at the beginning, a unique opportunity to deliver support to the victims of climate change. So basically 2 messages: ASP highly relevant for loss and damage, and investing in systems that are then there to absorb financing is a clear priority in order to deliver loss and damage focused on poor households. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christian. I think that was, again, an excellent presentation. I think even here in Berlin, we learned a little bit, but let me have a look at Bonn. Again, the test, show your thumbs whether you've learned a little bit about the potential of ASP for loss and damage. Magdalena, what is the... Okay, again. Good. Thank you very much, Christian. For the audience here, I like to ask you to keep your questions. We will come to an interactive session. If you are online, you can, of course, use the chat to post already questions. Stefan, on my side, is collecting them and will introduce them later into the discussion. We will have now a panel discussion, as I explained before, with 2 rounds. The first one looking more of the possible contribution of ASP to loss and damage, and a second round more asking how the L&D financing arrangement or an L&D fund should be constructed, that ASP could really have a prominent role into it. For this, I'd like to introduce my panel. Christian, you know already. We have in Bonn 2 members on the transitional committee, what Sönke presented. Again, this is the committee who is negotiating how the funding arrangement and the new fund for losses and damages should look like. We have Rosa Perez. She is from the Philippines. She is a former, now I have to look, was formerly serving as a director at the Hydrometeorological Services for the Philippines, and is now an independent consultant and researcher on impacts of climate change. We have Jens Vogel with us. He works for the Foreign Affairs Ministry in Denmark and is there one of the transitional committee members representing all the European Union. In Bonn, we have with us Navid Akbar. He's the Director General for the National Socio-Economic Registry and Conditional Cash Transfer Program. This was also mentioned before, the Benazir Income Support Program in Pakistan. And we have with us Sayanta Sengupta. She's working for the Red Cross and is accompanying ASP projects in the field and also working on policy issues. I'd like to start with the questions directing to our colleagues in Bonn and starting with you, Rosa. Can you tell us from your experiences in the Philippines, is adaptive social protection an important part in responding to loss and damage, and what other instruments and answers are needed? And as a general rule, I want to say you have always 4 minutes to respond. Please don't be offended. I want to be very strict on the timing, that we have an agile discussion and enough time for a participative Q&A session. So, Rosa, please come up with your answer.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. From my point of view, yes, adaptive social protection can play a crucial role in responding to loss and damage from climate change. As you are aware, the Philippines is located in an area which is highly at risk to climate-related impact drivers such as tropical cyclones, floods which are rapid onset, and then droughts and sea level rise, which are slow onset events. These events can lead to significant loss and damage, affecting the well-being and livelihood of the population. The Philippine government has recognized the importance of social protection and has been implementing policies and programs that can help build resilience and assist affected communities in recovering from this climate-related loss and damage. These involve interventions such as social safety nets, conditional cash transfers, and livelihood diversification programs. For example, Pantawid Pamilyang Pilipino program, translated into English, is a bridging program for Filipino families, or 4Ps, is a conditional cash transfer program being implemented by the Department of Social Welfare and Development. It started in 2007. It provides financial assistance to low-income households, particularly those with children between 0 and 18 years of age, and those households also that are affected or that were affected by disasters. To receive the cash grants, beneficiary households must comply with certain conditions, such as ensuring that children attend school, receive regular health checkups, and avail vaccination and preventive health services. The program also includes capacity building activities and interventions in order to empower the beneficiaries, like livelihood training, financial literacy programs, and parenting session. And these were stated by Christian in his presentation. There is also the Cash for Work program of the Department of Agriculture to provide financial support to farmers, fisher folks, and other stakeholders of the agriculture sector. This is to alleviate the impacts of various challenges such as market fluctuations, disaster events, and of course, the COVID pandemic. And you were asking what other instruments and answers are needed. I think in order to address loss and damage, there should be a combination of instruments and approaches. And this depends on local context, climate risks that are present in the area, and development priorities. So a comprehensive and integrated approach should combine social protection, adaptation, and mitigation measures. And we regard disaster risk reduction as part or a gateway to adaptation in the long term. These measures will effectively respond to loss and damage from climate change. In terms of the DRR portion, which is the prepare part, we can have risk assessment and early warning systems, sustainable infrastructure development, and ecosystem conservation and restoration could be very well as an adaptation. But the means of implementation, we need some technology and technology transfer and the financial mechanisms that should go into it. And we do not we underscore the importance of international cooperation in this regard. That's all, Mr. Moderator. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rosa, from your experiences in the Philippines and your expectations, what has to come into the L&D funding arrangements. Jens, Denmark is one of the supporters of the SASPP program, which was presented here. You also were, after Germany, the first country who put money into the Global Shield, which was presented here. Also, I would be interested to hear what are the motivations for Denmark to support these programs in the past, and how would you see could they be a contribution to respond to loss and damages? And perhaps you have other experiences to share on your ASP support, which can inform the L&D discussion. And before answering the question, I want to say in general for the panelists, if you feel you want to answer to one of these statements before, please feel to do, and you might divert a little bit from my questions in the sense of an agile discussion. Thanks. Please, Jens.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question and also for the invitation to participate in this event. And I think sort of as sort of the overall answer to your question is also sort of like Rosa, sort of a big yes, that we really see this sort of adaptive social protection networks as something that potentially could play an important role in responding to climate-related loss and damage, and also could be play an important role as part of what comes out of the discussion we now have about funding arrangements. Just to say a little bit about our sort of reasoning and motivation for going into this program in the Sahel region. I mean, we are a new partner. Some of the other partners have already been working almost 10 years now with building up the Sahel Adaptive Social Protection Program. But I think we were looking sort of, we came into it sort of from this realization that climate change and the impact of climate change was increasingly going to be sort of a major development challenge in the Sahel region. It's already a very dry region where sort of weather and water availability for agriculture and for other purposes is a major a challenge, and just sort of very small changes can really make a huge impact on the people, for the people living there. And sort of we see that both sort of the longer term changes could lead to sort of major changes in water availability, and also major changes in the risks of sort of shorter term droughts and floods that affects people. At the same time, it's one of the poorest regions in the world, where there's really a lot of people, in particular sort of in the rural areas, that are really sort of at a sort of poverty level, where sort of just a small shock even in that affects their agricultural production and their livelihoods can really sort of create sort of a major impact on the daily lives of people. And then finally, it's a region where there's sort of an increase, unfortunately, sort of an increased issue also of conflict and sort of warlike situations in many parts of the region that also leads sort of to sort of displacement of people and migration on top of the climate effects. And I think all these things together made us sort of look at this program as something that could sort of, in a sense, address that sort of multifaceted challenge and direct support directly to people. So just sort of to highlight some of the things I think we found very important with this type of program and approach. And I think I apologize for, in a sense, repeating what both Rosa and Christian has already said, but I think first of all, it's sort of adaptive social protection programs. I think we see it as a way to support sort of the most vulnerable people, households, and communities directly. Sort of having this sort of direct focus. I think we also see it as a way, in a sense, to deal with sort of this multiple challenges and multiple risks of shocks that those communities are facing at the same time and in a sort of holistic and integrated way. I think we like also that it builds on sort of national systems. I think what we heard from Rosa was also that it's very much a national system, and I think also in the Sahel, that's sort of part of what is important in this program, that in a sense built on national system and built capacity and preparedness to be better and better at doing this also in the future. And I think that's something we also really like with this program. And I think then we like the combination of some cash transfers, both sort of ongoing, but also cash transfers in the event of shocks directly to households, and then some activities working with those affected peoples and communities in building back better, in a sense, and also addressing those ongoing development issues that are still there as sort of part of responding to the crisis. But I think sort of the cash transfer part, we also see it in a sense as a way of empowering people and in a sense allowing the people also to make their own choices about what is the best coping strategy, in a sense, in the event of a sudden onset climate change, for example, and sort of develop their own strategies for how best to cope with that based on some support without sort of a very predefined way of doing things. Yeah, I think I'll stop here, but thanks a lot for, I think we see this event as a really sort of timely event that really bring those two communities together, because we see a lot of sort of the solutions perhaps in the loss and damage domain can be drawn from this area.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jens, from this perspective from a donor country on ASP and your expectations for the future. Let me now come to the panel here in Berlin, and starting with Naweed, that you share with us an insight what role the social protection system played last year when Pakistan had to respond to the flood disasters, and what are your plans to increase the readiness of the programs for future climate-induced shocks?
Yeah, so thank you very much. So you all aware that Pakistan has a history of climate-related disasters, and we have seen floods last year, and we are like, as I speak, we are also facing this cyclone issue, and there are heavy rains going on in some parts of the country. So last year flood actually affected roughly 33 million individuals and almost half of the country. And so we have 4 provinces and 2 regions. So almost all region and province affected by the flood and the rains and the flash floods. So so what we did is that because we have disaster management authorities at the provincial level and also the disaster management authorities at the federal level, and they have a very good coordination mechanism through which they were able to play a role for identification of the areas affected by the flood. And what social protection role as a social protection program, BMZ income support program played a role that on the basis of identified affected areas, we identified the affected population. With the help of our National Socioeconomic Registry, as we have the database of almost all households of the country with the GPS coordinates, so we exactly know who is living where, and on the basis of the assessment and on the basis of the identification by our disaster management authorities, we were able to identify the affected households. And through BMZ income support program, we have what we have done is that we increase the numbers. So we did this horizontal and vertical expansion of the program. So we provided $100 per family as an immediate cash allowance to roughly 2.8 million families. So we allocated roughly $300 million for that particular initiatives. So to just let you know that in the past, it was very rare that that government of Pakistan decided to use the adaptive social protection mechanisms to help the families affected by the flood, because usually we took a lot of time for assessing the damage and loss, assessing the population affected by the flood, and then go for the response. And the immediate response that usually government give is providing the food and shelter to the affected population. But last time it was the first time when we were able to immediately respond to that shock and provided this cash assistance, probably within a week of the flood. We have the delivery systems in place, we have this registry in place, which actually has helped us to quickly respond to the flood shock.
Yeah, thank you very much, Naveed. I mean, this is already an interesting part to see how Pakistan is changing its coping strategies for losses and damages using ASP.
Second question is the future planning.
Shortly,
if I missed,
please.
yeah. So as I mentioned yesterday as well, we have this National Socioeconomic Registry in place, and now it's a dynamic registry now. The first dynamism that we are doing is that we are actually updating the socioeconomic status of the household affected by the floods. So if they've lost any asset or lives, they are getting the opportunity to update their information. And if they are not part of our regular cash assistance, this updation in the socioeconomic status will actually help them to become part of our regular cash transfer program. And the good thing would be that God forbid, if we will face any disaster or shock, we will have the updated socioeconomic status available with us, and then probably we can, through better targeting, can respond to any shock in a better way.
Yeah, I mean, this is the vertical and horizontal expansion Christian was talking about, which you have in the planning. Yeah, Sayanti, from the Red Cross, I think it's now a very special question that as a humanitarian actor, traditionally I think the actors working not so much over government channel using the social protection program, but we know things are changing, and we would be interested to hear how you now see working together with state-led social protection program. How could they be used to channel humanitarian assistance? And how could this be even improved in future to respond to climate-induced shocks?
First of all, I would like to start by saying thanks for having me in the panel and for being able to bring this humanitarian perspective into the discussion. Yes, government-led systems are absolutely crucial after a disaster event, and we have realized that we generally say 72 hours after a disaster is the most important, not just for life-saving, but also the things that you want to set in motion to deliver an effective intervention, right? And sometimes the existing systems that government has put in place, the MOUs and agreements that already exist in the country, these are what is needed even to receive humanitarian funding. So the funding will come in if the systems are in place, but sometimes legal requirements stop you from receiving the fundings, and this needs to be put in place for the disaster that you're trying to respond to. And so when the systems are not in place, what the humanitarian actors or the Red Cross movement does is try to align as much as possible with what exists in the country. So this could be in terms of the type of transfer we provide, the type of cash assistance, the level of benefit, and things like that. But in general, we have to recognize that in some countries, the systems are still nascent, and humanitarian actors like the Red Cross has a big role to play. I would like to bring in the example of our work in Nepal, where we have worked with the Danish Red Cross and Nepalese Red Crescent Society on an eco-funded project, where we have used funding arrangements that pre-exist in the country once a flood was triggered, based on a forecast trigger that we had established. And based on this forecast, when we knew that the flood was going to happen, we raised emergency funding from the Red Cross movement, and this was sent to the bank accounts of the social assistance program beneficiaries. This has never happened before. You generally use mobile wallets, you generally use the same financial service providers and things like that, but using the same bank account for receiving humanitarian aid, which is external to the country, has not happened. And this took lots of consultations, 2 years of working with the government, not only at the central level, but also at the municipality level, to tell them or to discuss with them how this can actually help. And what has happened after is that a part of the contingency budget that these municipalities receive every year, they have now seen the benefits of it, and they want to put a part of this money that they receive for anticipatory action. So actually, after seeing that how this money has helped, this humanitarian aid that was received by beneficiaries of social protection programs, when they saw that this has helped them, they actually were interested to do anticipatory action. So they were raising domestic funds. So this is a clear example that we have to lead the way by showing examples and what is possible, but the systems need to be strengthened. So I guess people in the room, and we going back to our work tomorrow, we would be interested in putting the blocks in place wherever we are working and strengthening the system like Christian just mentioned. So national systems are important. The humanitarian actors are working together and trying to support in making these systems more strong. Yeah, I would like to just end by saying at present the humanitarian needs are actually increasing than what's available. So we also have to acknowledge that, and that is why we need the loss and damage and investments in the systems, and then thinking how to strengthen, but also reach out to the households at the same time.
Yeah, thank you. This was already, I think, a good lead into the next session. How does L&D financing arrangement should look like? And before we do this, Stefan alerted me that there were quite a few questions in the chat. And even if we are a little bit over time, we said we want to introduce one question and then ask one person to answer it, only one, otherwise we are running completely out of time. But Stefan reads the question, and then feel free, one of you, to take it up.
Yes, so we have one. The question is that as the recognition for social protection's role for climate change grows in the loss and damage community, how do we increase the awareness of the importance of regular social protection, so as opposed to adaptive, shock responsive social protection, as a poverty reduction tool to manage climate change beyond shocks? Yeah, so moving a little bit away from the focus that we had just now. And how do we communicate that to climate policymakers?
I think awareness is very important, and especially the community living along the river beds and all those things. And the regular cash transfer programs can play a very vital role in that. And probably, and we were in Pakistan thinking of introducing some conditional cash transfer program for the community who is more disaster prone, living in more disaster prone areas, for creating the awareness. So and having them as agent of the change within the community, so that they can also spread the messages to the people of their community, and probably that would be the way through which we can spread the awareness at a scale, because like country like Pakistan with huge population, we will talk about the financing option in next session, but only financing is not the solution. Probably we have to avoid loss and damage by creating the awareness, more awareness amongst the community. Otherwise, it will be like we can't have much resources for even if we want to establish any fund or financing.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this is really leading directly, I mean, in the next round, and maybe I asked you there's a second question. I mean, so from this, what do you think loss and damage financing arrangement should entail, that it really can support the needed adoption of the system, as you just were starting to explain?
So in Pakistan, what we are doing is that we are working on a concept of hybrid social protection with the support of World Bank, through which we are trying to cover all these aspects of the financing. Not only the government, but we are also trying to convince the community to save for their bad times. And we are actually introducing this concept of contributory mechanism to hybrid social protection, that if they will save one, we will match, the government of Pakistan will match to their savings, so that and that saving can be activated at the time of disaster. So as I mentioned earlier, we are like 240 million population country. Lot of like a large number of population living along this river belt, and they are living in probably in not proper houses, and face this issue of loss and damage quite frequently. So and last time when I was talking about this flood issue, so we had to reappropriate funds from the different resources to have this vertical and horizontal expansion to respond to the flood. And there was a talk at that time that there should be a permanent fund available within the social protection budget that can be activated at the time of any shock or flood, so that whenever there is a disaster, we should not waste time on arranging the funds, talking to the different donors and the development partners. Rather, before, we should have some kind of funding arrangements available, having all the development partners, all the stakeholders on board to have something to respond to the shock. And probably the extension of that, we are going to have this hybrid social protection mechanism in place, which can be financed through that fund that we will have, the dedicated fund we are going to have within our budget. And since we are currently in the closure of the financial year and we are having the annual allocation of the budget, there is discussion going on to have some dedicated financing under the social protection program. We have a National Disaster Risk Management Fund already established in our country, but that is more on early warning and creating awareness or doing some kind of investment. But probably from the loss and damage compensation, probably we need to have some kind of financing, a permanent financing available for the social protection program, and we are working on that.
And would there be an expectation that this kind of contingent financing is then linked to international resources, or is it like an international L&D fund, or is it something more what you say this is something done through domestic financing?
No, it's very difficult for us to manage it through domestic financing. It has to be linked with some international financing. Otherwise, like even this flood response, we had to ask our development partners to support, and then the half of the funds that we got for this flood affected population, we got it from the international development partners. So there are global funds available. We really want to tap those funds as well and be part of those financing options.
Yeah, thank you very much, Naveed. Back to you, Christian. Now you shared with us your experience from the Sahel. We had a lot of other examples. So imagine if somehow an L&D funding arrangement or a fund will be started at COP28. What do you think? How should it look like that it can really enhance the L&D responsiveness of social protection programs?
Thanks a lot. So, the vision of robust national systems that can operate in partnership with humanitarian actors is very attractive as a proposition to deliver loss and damage support, because if it's set up well, can both respond quickly, can respond early, and therefore be efficient in dealing with the detrimental effects of a climate event. Can also focus on helping households build resilience prior to and post shocks. Right? Now, that vision is not a reality in every country. So not every country is as advanced as Pakistan. And Pakistan has some way to go, but many countries are less advanced. So I think, first of all, there is some way to go to continue to support countries in setting up these systems. Building social registries that are large, that are dynamic, building payment mechanisms, advancing on identification agenda, building the plumbing of adaptive SP systems. Because only if the plumbing is solid will these systems actually be able to deliver on that promise of providing support to the poorest of the poor who are most impacted by climate change globally. So first of all, I think in terms of thinking of loss and damage financing at this point is creating systems. But once these systems are created, then they're there and they can operate at very limited marginal cost to provide support at any scale as needs arise, whether it's floods, whether it's droughts, etc. So I think it's important to think of that in that two-step mechanism. And so at the country level, there are examples of creating a fund that can be replenished, that can be the vehicle to release financing when shocks occur. There are multiple ways of doing this, and I think we're exploring this, and there's a live discussion about it. But the idea is that systems are in place with protocols, with trigger mechanisms, with early warning systems that help release financing before the drought occurs. We had a session yesterday on using novel data to allow for early action to drought response. There's a lot that is happening. It's a very innovative area of work, and I'm saying this to our colleagues in Bonn. It's pretty exciting what's possible in terms of providing response early on. So it's interesting to tap into that conversation. But these systems, when set up, should be very effective to draw in loss and damage financing for when climate events occur.
Yeah, thank you very much, Christian. I have now to ask all panelists to be quite sure that we have at least a short round with interventions from the audience. I mean, the same question goes to you, Sayanti. I mean, we've heard now a lot, and please give your experience from the Red Cross. What would you see as a need for financing from the L&D side? that social protection systems can get responsive to it. Yeah.
Yes, just like Christian was mentioning, we need to be honest about where social protection stands. We still have less than 50% of the world actually effectively covered by social protection. So one way is actually to start investing in setting up these blocks, this plumbing that we are talking about. And we see that happening. So the Red Cross National Society is working across countries. They're supporting, even in Pakistan, the Pakistan Red Crescent, Nepalese Red Crescent, Nigerian Red Cross Society. We have been supporting all of these national societies to actually work together with the governments to expand coverage, to ensure where is the targeting, where are the inclusion errors. And so this is happening. And when this, as this happens, we are also talking about making sure that the loss and damage fund or the funding arrangements that is finally decided, we will be ready with our systems when this arises and when this comes true. So this is the big vision. And in general, as a ground rule, let's talk about strengthening core social protection systems, but also not forgetting the legal framework. So in our work in Sierra Leone, what we have done working 2 years, for the last 2 years, we have worked on a World Bank funded project actually. And we have worked together bringing the Ministry of Labor, the Social Security, the Disaster Management Agency to work together to see, is the country even ready for disaster risk financing? So it started with a system readiness assessment, analyzing the political economy, analyzing the targeting processes, the grievance and redressal mechanisms. So just looking at the whole system. And this was done also with support from humanitarian organizations, and Red Cross was part of it. And then we have worked on the social protection bill, which is going to be tabled this year. And it will be one of the first bill in the country. So they have a social protection bill, and what is coming up is an update to this bill. And they recognize climate risk as something that social protection is going to address. They are recognizing climate vulnerable people and not just poverty vulnerable people. So they are creating these categories for other people to actually get the support that they need. So this legal framework also needs to be in place when we talk about this plumbing. So legislations are definitely an important thing to look out for.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will turn now the questions to the members of the Transitional Committee, to Jens and Rosa. I think you've heard and you stated before, ASP could have possibly a very large role in responding to loss and damages. On the other hand, it was clearly stated there's groundwork to be done. It's not just possible to make funds available and then they could be absorbed, the plumbing, as it said. So perhaps first to Jens, the question: do you think, I mean, this vision of a more holistically strengthening ASP systems could be part of the L&D funding arrangement, or is there only money available really in the aftermath of shocks? What do you think? Can such a vision be incorporated into the discussion leading up to COP28?
Thank you very much for that question. And I think, again, I would hope that the answer is yes, that it can be. I think we have heard quite a lot of talk about sort of adaptive social protection networks and social protection networks in general as sort of part of the mosaic of solutions that we need to look into. And I would very much hope that sort of part of the recommendations that we come up with will be something that can sort of give a push to this type of arrangements as a way to both respond to loss, to loss and damage, but also to do it in a sort of holistic way where it also looks at some of the other challenges that many of the same households and people are facing in a more holistic way. So the good question in a sense is how we can do that. But I would hope that we can do that, and by talking to some of the key actors that are working in this space, perhaps both to the governments that are an important part of setting up these systems. But I think you also earlier mentioned something like the Global Shield as perhaps sort of a vehicle that can be used to sort of share experience about how to do these things and sort of spread the idea to areas where it's not currently taken on, and sort of help these ideas getting started. Yeah, so I think I'll stop here, but I definitely see it as part of sort of giving a push to this sort of as part of what our recommendations should entail.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jens. And more or less the same question goes to you, Rosa. What role do you see for the L&D funding arrangement in relation to adaptive social protection, and what does it take to achieve this?
I personally look forward that this fund will be able to support social protection, expanding its in terms of scale and beneficiaries. Probably I should say something about how the L&D fund is being looked at as as to address the impacts of loss and damages from climate change related events. It's not disaster risk reduction, it's not adaptation. So that would limit the perspective of using the funds for other than responding to the loss and damages. But we can assert that building resilience in between the events, for example, in the Philippines, we have 20 tropical cyclones, and 5 of these could be very damaging. So if you want to build back better, you need to have some building of resilience in between the events. And that will entail social protection, as I already explained earlier about the 4 Ps. We could add more funding to that kind of program, so that at the end of another event, the response or the result, the consequences of these climate-related events will not be as much as before, and therefore you reduce the loss and damages. So I look forward that these funds can be used for expanding social protection through mobilizing, as Jens said, the mosaic of agencies and organizations that can help in the operationalization of the fund. And I stop there.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rosa. I think this was an important part, which perhaps we haven't stressed enough, that also, I mean, how we use this kind of funds, that they should also have an impact in building resilience towards future shocks. And we have a question in the chat, which is asking, in addition, the question, can this funds also be used in a positive way for what is exactly the framing to protecting nature and, for example, reducing degradation? Perhaps something in mind for answering in the next round. So thank you very much for the panel so far. Even if we have less than 10 minutes left now, I want to open it up to the floor for questions or even statements on the role of ASP and the funding arrangements. I don't know, maybe you have statements of the contributions, or you have additional questions how this all will play out. Yeah, please come up with questions here in Berlin, and Magdalena is helping us if there are questions in Bonn. I see one hand here in Berlin, and start with this, and Magdalena then would be the next question up to Bonn.
Yes, thank you very much. This is Nisar Sani. I'm representing Pakistan, and one of the biggest provinces of the Pakistan, that's Punjab. Provincial Disaster Management Authority, head of the operations and of the disaster management. So I'm the person who look after our L&D during and post-disaster activities. I have some like discussion points for this forum, like this August forum. During any emergency or any onset of any disaster, we need to calculate the losses and damages very quickly. I have a question to Christian and Rosa as well. So, do we have any quick mechanism to calculate the losses damages as a way long? There was a terminology, MIRA, multi-sectoral initial rapid assessment, and after that in 2022 we introduced the PDNA, post-disaster risk assessment. For me, these are some like not comprehensive terminologies as once the disaster onset, we have to give the compensation and to give the relief to the people very quickly and in a transparent manner. So the data collection of the real losses damages is a challenge for the country like Pakistan, where the population is residing in the vulnerable areas and the remote areas, and people are sitting on the roads and all that. And the second question is to the forum as well. We are talking since last couple of days regarding the adaptive social protection and all that, but we are not trying to link it with the build back better policy, as if you can invest on the disaster risk management, so you can achieve the bigger agenda of the adaptive social protection as well, and you can also link it with the community-based disaster risk management and the risk assessment. So if you will able to know the risk and the shock responsive, then you have to invest on the basically covering the entire disaster management cycle. You can say you should basically invest on the reconstruction rehabilitation with the buzzword of the build back better policy, so that you can have you can achieve the bigger agenda of the by including the adaptive social protection and all other climate related risks. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we collect the questions and then see that we can answer it shortly on the panel. Magdalena, are there questions in Bonn?
Yes. Can you hear me? I don't know if you're sorry, can hear me. Yeah, Carol from UND. So no, just building on Rosa's proposals about the benefits of social protection system on the use of the loss and damages funds, but also by directional relation that exists on the need of building this evidence that we need to really define a word fund, loss and damages fund. And wanted just to make a statement and a question from the comprehensive disaster management strategy that we're trying to develop, and comprehensive risk management approach, taking into account important points that were mentioned by Denmark on the need of use a systemic approach, and also systemic and multi-hazard risk assessments. So my question is, how do you see the relationship between ASP for loss and damages and disaster reduction action? Because we cannot separate both disciplines, you know. As from the DRR perspective, we see climate change as a driver, so it's producing more frequent and more intense climate-related events. But there is, from using this systemic approach, there is interactions, compound and cascading events. So we cannot just let DRR outside of the climate change discipline. So how do you see the interaction between ASP, DRR, and climate change for the definition of loss and damage funds and mechanisms?
Yeah, thank you. I have even two questions here and one from the virtual audience. Please ask your question, but I mean, really try it in 30 seconds. Otherwise, we are running over time.
Thank you. I'm Marco Knowles from FAO, where I'm leading the social protection team there. One question is, what are the main differences between the Global Shield and the Loss and Damage Fund in terms of what can be funded and what cannot? And then the second is more of a comment. It's emphasizing a little bit what some of the questions, I think, the idea that's behind a couple of the questions is the importance of looking also at how social protection can be leveraged to support some of the longer term adaptations in livelihoods. We have the examples of Brazil with the Bolsa Verde program, Ethiopia with the PSMP, India with the MG Nrega, where these social protection programs are being leveraged to support the restoration of the natural resources that these rural populations who are highly vulnerable to climate change depend on, and so support longer term adaptations in livelihoods.
Hi, Julie Lawson-McDowell from Save the Children UK. Given that 80% of the world's extreme poor live in fragile and conflict-affected areas, where often government either can't reach or is implicated in conflict, what about linkages with humanitarian response? What about a more systematic approach? And I speak not only on behalf of myself, but also on behalf of colleagues working in the SPIAC-B working group on linking humanitarian response and humanitarian cash and voucher assistance. To me, this has been a missing element throughout the last 3 days. Thank you.
Thank you. And then, Stefan, we had one question from the virtual audience.
Yes, but I think that was basically identical to Marco's question. So basically, what are the co-benefits in terms of protecting nature, reducing land degradation, and so on? And I assume public works would be the direction this is going.
Okay, so we had several questions, but I mean, some of them I think were really linked to the question how ASP and disaster risk management are linked, how ASP can contribute to preparedness, to long-term adaptation. And then there was exactly the data question. Help me.
About
your question on the
methodology.
Yeah, how to quickly calculate the damage. I think I asked you on the panel to pick up the question if you like, just do it only in 1 minute. I would ask you in the audience that we take it about 5 minutes longer, but not more, because this time the break is only 1 hour, not 1.5. So if you want to pick it up quickly, do it and yeah, be quick. Thanks.
Okay, I can try to go really quick and tackle the question on ASP, DRR, climate change, and the public work component. Generally, we see that public work programs have been building long-term resilience, and there is some sort of evidence coming from India. And also, Ms. Rosa mentioned that this fund is for responding to the impacts. So it can strengthen systems, and we will see if that evolves in that direction. But for impacts, when we provide the income for public work programs, the cash transfer for in exchange of labor, and in India it has happened that we have increased the number of days that you get in the year to deal with the socioeconomic crisis. So this has helped people to not only deal with the stress that happened in the moment of shock, but also have their food security levels and livelihoods and dropout rates and things like that maintained as what was before the shock. And then public work programs, soil conservation or deforestation, preventions against deforestation. So some of these intentional aspects have been integrated into this public works program in India, which is trying to build the long-term climate resilience of these populations, and we see more and more people getting involved in that. And some of these structures not only help in climate resilience, but also disaster risk reduction, like the mangroves in the Sundarbans area. Protection of these mangroves, they will reduce the impacts of the cyclone, sometimes to a significant extent of how much the sea waves can come inside because of these structures. So there is, this is a great example of one of the social protection instruments being used for not only resilience building, but also the stresses managing at a short term and then looking at the long-term impacts.
Thank you very much for this. Rosa, do you want to take up the data question, perhaps?
I'm not, I do not do the PDNA, but I know that through international cooperation, like UN SCOP has this methodology that they apply for doing the PDNA. So I'm sorry that I cannot give you the details because I'm not into this. But I would like to go into the other questions. In real life, it is a continuum from the preparation down to the adaptation in the long term. However, the fund itself is limited only to up to recovery and rehabilitation, and again towards responding to the immediate consequence. It's the fund itself, not the activities. The activities can be linked together. So it's up to the individual countries to set up the necessary, I would say, institutional arrangement, so that if these particular activities can only be funded by the LDF and the funding arrangement, then that could be applied to that particular stress. And the others can be, applied, the financial mechanism can be obtained somewhere else. But in real life, you cannot put a boundary between resilience building and adaptation, building adaptive capacity or adaptive social protection. So up to now, in my mind, I cannot put silos into these activities, and therefore, I think the limitation is the fund itself. But the funding arrangement, if managed effectively, can do the coordination, like with humanitarian assistance, or those that give humanitarian assistance, or you mentioned about the public works, then that could be coordinated through the mosaic of agencies and entities, also with insurance companies, the private sector. But the fund itself is very focused. So that's the way it is being negotiated, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Rosa, for this. I think perhaps the last answer, if it's fine for the other panelists, from Christian to respond shortly to the fragility question, and then we do one more, the polling.
Trying to compensate in 1 minute for the fact that that conflict and fragility hasn't really featured a lot in this forum. So first of all, in the Sahel, we're focusing quite a lot on this, and I'm going to say a few things about what we're doing in Burkina Faso, where we're working with the government for the next step towards really building a national program and a national system. And in view of the conflict dynamics in Burkina Faso, there's a recognition that the ASP system needs to be adaptive to conflict, right? And needs to think about, okay, how, rather than stopping from being active, how do you scale, how do you adapt the delivery of support to different degrees of fragility? Paring it back, using mobile money, using remote engagement, etc. So that's something that is happening. However, there's also a dimension of humanitarian actors who are running their cash transfer programs, and where government is complaining of the fact that every organization sets their own benefit level, their own eligibility criteria. So asking really for a more systemic approach in partnership between the government and humanitarian actors. But in terms of the interaction of ASP, state, government-led ASP and humanitarian actors, we've done some work in the Sahel. There's a report that looks at it very, very systematically about what are the models and the mechanisms of engagement, which is on our website. So that's certainly something to look into as a lead off this conference.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, we're coming to an end. It's not possible to sum up the discussion completely. I think we saw that ASP can contribute a lot to respond to loss and damages, that systems are partly there, but there's a lot to be done to absorb additional L&D financing. I think there's a clear need to strengthen ASP or social protection system to become more adaptive. There was some openness from the transitional committee members to accept such an holistic view, to say we need to invest in the preparedness. Rosa also cautioned that we cannot expect that the L&D fund will work on the whole disaster risk management continuum, that it's needed a combination perhaps of different climate instruments which are already out there working more on adaptation. Clearly, there is a need, I think, for the social protection community to work on our end to build the system, that they can be then linked up to international financing mechanisms. Altogether, I hope with the session we could help both in Bonn, the climate experts, to understand more about what ASP could contribute to the loss and damage discussion. I hope we could enhance a little bit what we hope that will be developed under the UNFCCC framework. I hope here on the side the understanding of the L&D process increased a little bit. But I want to do our five-finger polling from the beginning again and see what's happening. So first, the question out here in Bonn, here in Berlin, and out there in Bonn and virtually. Where do you see yourself? What are your knowledge on adaptive social protection?
Or maybe
Increase.
yes.
I have the feeling even here I see more 4 than 3 before. I don't know. This would be great. How is it in Bonn?
Yeah, we actually see like 3 and 4s now. So this is actually a big improvement.
Yes.
Oh, from 1.5 to 1.5. So here, thank you very much to this round. And then the other question, maybe more for Berlin. To what extent do you understand how the loss and damage discussions are going on and towards the COP28? What is your understanding now? I think on average it's 3. I see 2 and 4s and 3. So maybe it's 3 before it was 2. So this is also an improvement. In Bonn also did it improve, or perhaps you were already experts enough from 4? No way to improve further?
Always more to learn.
Status quo.
Okay, so especially we were very successful here in our lobbying and knowledge creation efforts for the climate experts from 1.5 to 3.5. So I would see this session as a success. I hope you do the same. I wish you having a good lunch. Please be reminded the next session starts exactly at 1:30 with a closing session, including my Minister Schulze. But before, enjoy your lunch and all the best over to Bonn. And thanks for everybody in the virtual world who was listening in. How many people were listening in the end?
25 at the
25 in addition, so altogether about 100 people, not too bad. Thank you very much.